Count it all joy when you face trials. I'm reading James 1 this morning, and he starts off by saying, count it all joy when you face trials. Count it joy. Pure joy, actually. He said, pure joy. And I was like, pure joy. It's like almost like refined joy when you face trials. Because what he's saying is that in the midst of your trials, you become refined to a point where nothing phases you and everything is Christ. And it's almost a sense of when Jesus was in the wilderness and he had to face, we talk about the three temptations, but the devil asked him three things over a period of 40 days at his weakness, at his weakest. And he comes out triumphant. And as if James is saying that for us to experience that wilderness experience, it is our own versions of trials and tribulations. And that is the refining fire that God does a work within us. Count it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. One could say, well, we're in the West, we don't have the same types of persecutions that they have in third world countries or in communist countries. And to some extent, that could be true, where in the midst of trials and tribulations, you have to rely more and more on the Lord. But I would also say that living in the West, where things are peaceful, where things are at ease, is probably even harder, much harder, where James is saying count it joy when you fall into them. So it's not as if he's saying that it's taken as a given, but when you get those opportunities, first trials and tribulations, you should really grasp them. And living in a world where, in a society where things are peaceful and chilled, it is far harder to overcome because you aren't able to see the things that would draw you as close to God as you would if you're struggling through trials and tribulations, where you're comfortable, where you're at ease and relaxed. You're not looking for God. It's quite easy to fall into religious practice of going to church on a Sunday, fellowship in the midweek, prayer meetings, pay your tithes and stuff, and that just becomes routine. But when the midst of the trials, you're like, wow. So if you look at the kings of Israel, when there were no wars, when the things were fine, a lot of them fell. When David was supposed to follow his army into battle, he stayed home. When he stayed home, he fell into temptation with Bathsheba. It starts off by saying, in the times when kings go to war, David was at home. So there's a sense of when things are at ease, it's quite easy for us to slip. Quite easy for us to slip. One of the things that I would just encourage us all, I always start with myself, is to ask the Lord just to continue to take us through the refining fire in his own way, mercifully. Asking for trials and tribulations is not, it's very challenging. But the Lord knows our hearts, knows where we are, and it's important that we keep ourselves fit and ready for these last days battles. A prize fighter, a boxer, a wrestler, or an athlete knows they need to constantly train because they don't know when they're going to be called upon to go for their toughest match or battle. And even though the Olympics were cancelled 2020, the athletes now have another 6 months to put themselves back in prime condition so that they can compete at the next Olympics. As Christians, we need to continually be active, training, and alert. And James is saying that count it pure joy when you fall into trials and tribulations, because that's, in a sense, is where you start working your spiritual body and working yourself to be ready for this end-term battle. So my prayer is that we count it joy when trials and tribulations come. Not that it's challenging, but Christ has gone through all things. But we continue to keep ourselves active and patient, waiting on the Lord. Amen.